Hey and welcome back to Fanfic Reading. Today we are reading The Warmth That Changed It All by Raalm and ToxicExotic. I hope you enjoy.
Chapter 85, Ultimatum. It had been 3 hours. 3 boring, unproductive hours of poring over the business textbook that a student in the business course had recommended as a good place to start, and yet barely a single word of it had sunk in. Plenty of other things had, such as the conversation about an upcoming game launch that 2 girls were talking about behind her, and the issues the boy on the next table was having with his overprotective brother. Even things she didn't care about, like the latest social media trend that was being discussed by a nearby group, had stuck with her more than anything she had read. "How on Reddit does Weiss enjoy this stuff?" she groaned, once again trying to read the same passage that she had zoned out on 5 times already. "Because she focuses and doesn't complain about it every 15 minutes. Blake replied, her face buried in yet another law book as she ate her food. "She's also a book learner like me. You're not." "Yeah, I know that, thank you," Yang replied bitterly. "Then why don't you just ask Weiss for help?" "Because she's been busy getting ready for this meeting," Yang lied. "Besides, I can't keep relying on her. I have to be able to do this on my own." "Well, that's just stupid logic. Any chance you could be more unhelpful?" "I already gave you a solution. You turned it down." Yang let out a sigh and shook her head. "Whatever." She knew it wasn't Blake's fault. The girl had in fact given her a solution, one that would undoubtedly make things easier, but it was one that she constantly found herself unable to go through with. She had tried multiple times to talk to Weiss, to ask her for help, but every time she was about to, Jock's voice rang in her head, reminding her of what asking for help could make Weiss realize. And worse still was the fact that she still didn't know what she was going to do. She loved Weiss more than she had ever loved anyone, and she was trying her best to learn how to not be someone who held her back. But no matter how many books she read, or how many lectures she attended, nothing was changing. She hadn't even managed to get the job she'd interviewed for a few days prior. She was failing at every venture, and each failure only made her feel worse as they proved just how right Jock was about her. Unfortunately, even as she thought about it, she once again began to feel tears begin to sting at her eyes. It had been an all too familiar feeling in the past few days, and only growing more frequent as the days passed. "I really wish you'd stop snapping at me," Blake said quietly from behind her book. "Great," Yang sighed internally. Another thing to feel guilty about. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I'm not meaning to." "I know," Blake said understandingly. "But it keeps happening, and I'm tired of putting up with it. I'm your friend, not your punching bag." Yang gave a nod of her head. It had definitely been happening a lot more than usual. Ever since she'd gotten back from Mistral, things had been a little more difficult with Blake. She still loved her, and they were still sisters, but it felt like a rift had been created between them. They still laughed and joked together, but with Blake spending so much time with the White Fang, it was hard for the topic to not come up eventually. And when it did, talk of Luna was never far off. "You're right," Yang sniffled, seeing her sister lower her book out of the corner of her eye. "I keep making a mess of things, don't I?" Blake let out a sigh in response. Standing up from the table, she dropped what little of her sandwich remained onto the plate and put her book into her bag. Feeling the girl's hand slip into hers, Yang was pulled forcefully to her feet. "Come with me." Not bothering to fight her since she really didn't have the energy, Yang allowed Blake to lead her by the hand out of the cafeteria. Before even clearing the door, she felt the tears that had been stinging her eyes begin to fall. So wrapped up in her thoughts, she was barely even conscious of where she was being led until the sound of a heavy metal door opening greeted her ears, and she was pushed out into the bright sunlight. Looking around, she saw that Blake had brought her up to the roof. "All right," the girl said, letting the door close to and rounding on her. "What is going on with you?" "Enough dash." "No." The girl's voice was sharp and unyielding. "I haven't seen you this scared since Raven came back, and I want to know why. And none of the bullshit you've been feeding Weiss, because we both know I can see through that." Though Yang still didn't want to talk about it, looking into Blake's eyes was enough to make her realize that she wasn't getting off of the roof until she did. There was concern there, but also a steely resolve that Yang knew wouldn't fade until she talked. So letting out a deep breath and letting her head hang a little, she walked over to the nearby ledge and sat down. "Weiss' dad came to see me," she whispered. "Please tell me you didn't let that snake get into your head." "It's not," Yang scratched the back of her head. It's not that easy, Blake. Everything he said was right. Oh, really? And what was that? That Weiss' future is going to be damaged by having me in it. That to be with me, she has to risk never being able to achieve her dream. You both knew that was a redash. But not like this, Blake. Yang interrupted, her hands gripping the edge of the wall as she leaned forwards. We've been out for less than a month, and she's already left the STC and had a PTSD breakdown because the constant reporting of my past put her on edge. She is in a meeting right now with Fletch trying to convince him that I am not a complication that he needs to worry about. And yet here I am at college unable to even read a fucking book that could help me actually do something good for our future. I'm a screw-up, and now I'm not just screwing up my own future, but hers too. How is that fair to Weiss? Surely it's up to her to decide what is fair to her, Blake countered. Oh, come on. Yang breathed incredulously and pushed herself to her feet. You're the honest one. Look me in the eye and tell me that what he said is wrong. Just as she suspected, Blake was unable to meet her eyes. It was only for a moment, though, and the girl quickly recovered to do exactly what Yang had said. I can't, she admitted. You're right. You make Weiss' future harder, and you've definitely never taken your own seriously. But do you know why that is? Huh? The girl took a step forward, not bothering to wait for an answer. It's because you have spent your life looking after everyone but yourself. You raised a child. Instead of spending your afternoons doing your own homework, you spent them helping Ruby with hers. You spent them helping me with what I thought was right at the time, and then you helped me get out of it when we realized it wasn't. And I guarantee you have helped Weiss with things since you two started dating. So if there is one wrong thing about what you just said, it's that you are a screw-up. But if you give up on this of all things life has thrown at you and toss away what you have with Weiss because of something her asshole dad said that she doesn't care about, then, and only then, will you be a screw-up. Looking her sister in the eye, the amber orbs just as tear-filled as her own, Yang felt her legs begin to shake and let herself slide down the wall and onto the floor. Bringing her knees up to her chest, she buried her face in her hands and finally let the tears flow free. Feeling arms wrap around her, she leaned her head on her friend's shoulder. I can't lose her, she cried, feeling Blake pull her deeper into the hug. But I don't want her to resent me. I don't know what to do. Then talk to her, Blake said softly. Ask her for help if you need it, but don't try to make this decision alone. That's not fair to her. Yang knew Blake was right, but the idea of telling Weiss still scared her. What if it only made Weiss realize sooner? What if caused her to lose yet another person in her life? With how tenuous things were with her dad after the last therapy session, she wasn't sure she was ready to face the possibility of losing two people that she loved. But she also knew that if she didn't talk to Weiss, then what she was feeling would only get worse. It had only been 2 weeks, and she was already struggling to keep herself together. Either way, Weiss was going to find out eventually. You think she'll leave me? Yang sniffled, wrapping her arms around her friend. Please, Blake scoffed and rubbed her back. That's about as likely as her revealing she's a 200-year-old ninja. Despite everything, Yang couldn't help but let out a wet chuckle. You'd probably be trying to date her if she was, she joked half-heartedly. Hearing Blake snort, Yang gave another sniffle and felt Blake move to sit beside her. Looking over at her sister, she saw the amber eyes staring at her with nothing but affection. She loves you, Yang, the fauna said with a smile, reaching across to brush a tear away. And I doubt it has anything to do with your grades or what courses you take. Coughing and resting her head against Blake's shoulder, she gave the girl a nod. I'll talk to her today. Good. Blake smiled, taking her hand stroking the back of it with her thumb. Then you won't have to wait long to find out I'm right, again. Another chuckle left her, though it quickly died down. I'm sorry I keep being bitchy to you too. You don't deserve it. It's not like I don't get where it's coming from. Blake nodded. But it really would be nice to go back to how we were, right? Definitely. Yang nodded. Lifting her head up, she pressed a kiss against Blake's cheek before returning to her comfortable position. Just like always, Blake had been there for her. When things had felt hopeless, the girl had been her confidant and shoulder to cry on. And once again, Yang had found herself realizing just how lost she would be without her. For the first time since the session, she finally felt like she understood how her dad might have felt all those years ago. Walking through the doors of Signal College was an odd feeling. Unlike a beacon where everyone was either rich, famous, or simply so used to her coming and going that they paid her no mind, the students of Signal were not. As such, when she pulled the doors open and made her way to the staircase Blake had informed her about, multiple eyes turned her way. Whispers slowly began to start between those who were not already deep in conversation, and one girl even pulled out her scroll to snap a picture. But those things were not what made her feel odd. She was used to them after all. No. What made it all feel odd was how the stares and whispers only helped to accentuate Weiss' excitement. Instead of them making her feel nothing, as they usually did, or sick, as they had done over the past week, instead, they made her body tingle with pride. She knew it shouldn't, knew that they were simply staring because of who she was instead of what had just happened to her, but she didn't care. She was happy, and that's all that mattered. So, with a wide smile on her face, she walked down the hallway and even gave the girl a little wave for her picture. Jogging up the staircase and eventually arriving at a big metal door, she pushed her way through it and stepped out onto the roof. Sitting on the far side watching something on a scroll were the two people she was the most eager to see. She had no idea why neither of them were in class, but she was glad she wouldn't have to wait any longer to deliver the news. So? Yang asked with a raised eyebrow as they both stood up. How'd it go? Blake finished. You? She paused and let the smile overtake her face again. Are now looking at Weiss, joint owner of the solar engine patent, and... She didn't even get to finish. Before she could, Yang had wrapped her up into a bone-crushing hug and lifted her off of her feet. Laughing out of sheer joy, she threw her arms around the woman's shoulders and let herself be spun around. It didn't last long, but the second she was back on solid ground, she felt Yang's lips crash into hers. She hadn't expected the blonde to be so happy, but she was definitely not going to complain. I'm so proud of you, the chef said when she finally pulled away. If Weiss wasn't mistaken, there was a hint of relief in her girlfriend's voice, and she could definitely relate. The last few days had been some of the most stressful of her life, and many hours had been spent at her attorney's office working on finalizing the contract, but it had all paid off. After a 4-hour meeting with Fletch, she finally had exactly what she wanted. Congratulations, Weiss heard Blake say as a hand landed on her shoulder. Peeling away from Yang, she threw her arms around her friend's waist and pulled her into a hug too. Oh, okay then. Despite her clear hesitation, Blake quickly relented and returned it. Knowing Blake wasn't the most comfortable person with physical affection though, with the exception of a few people. She ended it after only a few seconds and gave the girl a grateful look. Barely a moment passed before Yang pulled her back into a tight embrace. So what's the business called? Blake said, straightening her coat. No idea, Weiss said happily, and leaned into her girlfriend. We still have a lot to work out, but for now, we are simply referring to it as the Solar Project. Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out. Yang smiled and gave her a quick squeeze. I'm guessing you'll be busy with meetings and stuff until he goes back? Nope. Weiss grinned and looked up at her girlfriend. He's moving here, so we can set up in Vale. Really? MHM. With all the economic issues, it's not really viable to start something in Mistral right now. And he doesn't really have any family there, so it works out for both of us. That was an understatement. Not only did it work out for them, but it was extremely beneficial. With both of them living in the same time zone, it allowed everything to move much faster. There would be no time wasted flying back and forth, or waiting for the others to wake up. There were 100 other conveniences that it gave them too, but the most important one was that it would make setting everything up flow much more smoothly. Well, I'll try my best to keep you both awake with coffee, Blake offered with a smile. Though we definitely can't keep delivering to you. Weiss gave the girl a grateful look. Since the coffee machine at her attorney's office made horrible coffee, Blake had been kind enough to bring them one whenever they needed it. Weiss had made sure to compensate the shop well for its troubles, but she knew that it was definitely too much of a burden for them to do it for an extended period of time. I appreciate the help you gave me this week, she smiled. I couldn't have done this without the both of you. What did I do? Weiss didn't miss the doubtful tone in her girlfriend, so looking up at her, she reached up and pressed a loving kiss against her lips. You were my much-needed emotional support, she cooed and gazed into the beautiful lilac eyes. And if it weren't for you telling me to be myself when talking to him, he would never have even considered doing business with me. Oh, there was a conflicted look in Yang's eyes. So I helped you? More than you realize. Weiss grinned and pressed another kiss onto her girlfriend's lips. And I think that is my cue to leave. Blake groaned and picked up her scroll. As she put it away, Weiss saw it had been playing an episode of Ninjas of Love. I need tea anyway. To Weiss' surprise, she watched as Blake pulled Yang into a hug. While it was definitely not uncommon for the two to be affectionate, it usually came in the form of a joke or a teasing poke. Very rare was it that the two actually hugged each other properly, and even rarer was Blake being the one to initiate them. Even more surprising was the soft look on Blake's face, which she had figured out was only ever present when she was trying to support someone. However, after only a moment, the two girls separated, but not before Weiss heard something that she doubted she was supposed to. Talk to her, Blake whispered. Confused at what that could be, she watched as the pair separated and Blake made her way to the door. It was unlike Yang to keep something from her, so much so that their last fight had been about keeping secrets. As such, the second the door closed, she rounded on her girlfriend with a suspicious look. Talk to me about what? Yang's hand immediately went to her hair and scratched anxiously. There was worry in her eyes, and she turned around to sit on a nearby vent. Sitting down, she let out a low sigh. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I need your help learning business. What? Was that really it? I've been trying for a few weeks, Yang admitted, her head down. But none of it seems to stick. A few weeks? Those books in the library? That was when? Yang, Weiss said and walked towards her. Is this why you've been acting strange? The girl nodded. You're giving up a lot for me, but I don't feel like I'm giving anything back. Kneeling down on the ground, she reached out and cupped her girlfriend's chin. Lifted her face up until their eyes met. She gave the woman a serious look. Yang, she said in a serious tone, never wanting to have to repeat herself again. You've given me everything that I could ever want or need. We went into this relationship knowing I would have to give certain things up, and yet my love for you has never wavered because the things I am giving up pale in comparison to how you make me feel. I know. Yang groaned and reached up to cover the hand on her cheek. I just don't want that to change one day. I don't want you to wake up and realize you could have done better. That won't happen. I'm not with you for business, Yang. Now, if you want to understand it more, then I will be happy to help, and I can even think of some fun ways to teach you, but that will never be what I need from you. Feeling the girl give a slight nod, Weiss reached across with her thumb and brushed away a tear that had begun to form. She had known for some time that Yang wasn't completely okay with everything she was giving up, but she didn't know that it had been affecting her that much. You're sure? I'm sure. Weiss smiled up at her. All I need from you is for you to keep being everything you have been. Supportive, loving, and kind. Because those are the things about you that I treasure. I can do that. Yang smiled, and for the first time in a while, there was no doubt in her mind that it was a genuine one. That is all I want. Pressing a kiss against the hand that was holding hers, she felt comfort in seeing the doubt that had been in Yang's eyes begin to fade. She didn't know why Yang hadn't come to her with those doubts. With her past, she supposed she understood it a little bit, but she thought that they had passed that. She thought that the secrets had come to an end. Why didn't you come to me earlier? Weiss asked, needing an answer. What even brought this up? The woman scratched the back of her head with a shameful look on her face. Your dad came to see me a while ago. Weiss let out a sigh and shook her head. Of course he'd visited Yang. Of course he had done to her exactly what he had done to everyone for years. Let me guess. He told you all about how you are ruining my reputation, and that you leaving me would be for my own good. Yang gave her a small nod. He played off of your fears, Yang. It's what he does, but you can't let him in your head. That's how he wins. But a lot of what he said made sense. Yang countered. He's well practiced in manipulation, Weiss explained. He weaves truths with lies to create doubt, and then lets that doubt tear people apart until he gets what he wants. But those doubts were in me before that. Good. Weiss smiled. All that tells me is that you care about our future. But you can't let those doubts overpower you, okay? Receiving another nod and a smile, Weiss let out a relieved breath and wrapped her arms around Yang's shoulders. Feeling arms wrap around her back and pull her in, Weiss buried her head into the wild mane of blonde hair and let Yang seek the comfort she needed. It wasn't long before she heard a small sniffling and felt Yang's fingers tighten on the back of her coat, but she remained quiet so that she could let it out. "I'm an idiot," she muttered a few minutes later. "Another thing I'd never denied," Weiss replied jokingly. Thankfully, it earned her a wet chuckle. "Thanks." Pulling away, she gazed down at her girlfriend and leaned forward to press their lips together in a short, but loving, kiss. "I love you," she said sincerely. "Whether you study business or not, that will not change. And if you ever feel like I don't, then just come to me and I shall set you straight." "I'll try," Yang replied, wiping a tear away from her eyes. She paused for a moment, and a forced smile appeared on her lips. "Good luck setting me straight, though. I am forever as straight as wet spaghetti." "I am going to pretend I did not hear that." Weiss rolled her eyes at her and suppressed a chuckle at the attempted humor, choosing instead to be thankful she had managed to get through to the woman. "Now, since you brought it up, what do you say to me, you and Blake picking up Ruby and getting some food to celebrate?" "Food sounds good," the girl sniffled. Giving the woman a sympathetic smile and holding out her hand, she helped her girlfriend to her feet and wrapped her up in another hug. For a minute, they simply stood there, Weiss doing her best to reaffirm everything she just said, but eventually she pulled away and took her by the hand. Leading her to the door, she was glad that it was behind them, but knew for certain that she would be having a conversation with her father by the end of the day. It had been some time since Weiss had last had such a good afternoon. Having spent the last month being so busy with the STC and organizing things for her meeting with Fletch, it was nice to finally be able to sit down and relax with her friends for once. It hadn't been much, merely a nice meal at Greenville followed by a short bowling session, at which she'd done terribly, but the few hours they'd all spent together had very much been needed. She'd enjoyed listening to Ruby recount her date with Ilya, which had apparently gone very well, and hear Blake talk about what was going on with the meetings in the store. She'd enjoyed spending the entire afternoon cuddling up to her girlfriend and slowly, but surely watching as the woman returned to her normal, joyful self. The small competition, complete with a wager between her and Blake, had also helped bring her spirits back, and by the end of the night the blonde had her giant, lovable grin back on her face. Unfortunately, though, the night had eventually come to an end. After a small toast to her success, they had all returned home. All except Weiss, who had instead returned to the mansion. As great as the night had been, she had still not forgotten that her father had almost ensured that such a thing never happened again. Had it not been for Blake calming Yang down first, Weiss knew the conversation she and her girlfriend had on the roof could have been very different, if it would have even happened at all, and for that she was immensely thankful to the Faunus. However, she was very much interested in such a thing never happening again, so shaking off her jacket and hanging it on the coat rack, she stepped into the atrium and saw Klein walking towards her at a brisk pace. "Mein Schneeflock," that man said with his arms open and a wide smile on his face. "Good evening, Klein." She smiled and let him pull her into a hug. "A week without you is too long," the man said, and pulled away to look her up and down with a dissatisfied tooted sound. "You look thin. You haven't been eating properly." "I have lately," Weiss reassured him. The man's eyes swept over her again and landed on her face, where she knew he was looking at the fact her hair was still parted to cover her left eye. Worry entered his own. "Oh," his voice held nothing but sadness. "What happened?" "A story for another time," she said, and put a hand on his shoulder. "But I am fine now, Klein. I need to speak with my father. Is he home?" "Mr. Schnee is in his office," the man said, relief entering his tone. "Good." Weiss smiled and handed the man her bag. "Will you also tell Whitley to stay in his room tonight?" The relief faded as fast as it came. "Of course, Miss Schnee." "Thank you, Klein." Receiving only a worried look from the man, she walked past him and toward the door beneath the staircase. Pushing her way through it, she approached the office door and took a deep breath. She had no idea what mood her father would be in, and couldn't help but feel a little bit of anxiety as she reached out for the door handle. Even though she was no longer seeking his approval or under his thumb, a part of her was still a little scared of him. But she needed to make sure he understood that she wouldn't stand for his intrusions in her life anymore. So, with a composing breath, she straightened her form and pushed the door to his office open, not even bothering to knock. The man didn't look up from whatever letter he was working on. "I see you are well again," the man said boredly. "Yes," she replied, not surprised in the slightest that he had heard about what happened. "No thanks to you." First you complain when I help you, and now you complain when I don't. He sighed. I am beginning to think there is no pleasing you, daughter. If you wished to please me, you would stay out of my relationship. Weiss took a step forward, and the man finally looked up from his document. And what, pray tell, am I supposed to have done this time? How about we start with how you ambushed Yang at her house? Weiss scowled and crossed her arm. That was weeks ago. The man shrugged dismissively. And I merely told her the truth. You told her a truth. Weiss corrected him. Your own truth, not ours. I told her the truth of the world. He put his pen down and leaned back in his chair. Your truth is nothing more than a naive belief that you yourself have disproven. Remind me, how long was it that you lasted as my assistant? There was something in the man's eyes that set Weiss on edge. A knowing, almost satisfied look, and it didn't take long for Weiss to figure out why it was there. As all the pieces began to slot together in her head, she felt her blood begin to boil. She knew the man was calculating and manipulative, but if she was right, then what he had done was disgusting. You wanted me to quit, she whispered. You pushed me out so that when you approached Yang, I would confirm everything you said to her. I gave you both a glimpse of your future together, and you didn't last a month before cracking, the man said with zero remorse. Do you think that the opportunities you seek in the future will not be met with the same hesitancy? That the companies you seek help and partnership from will not see your affiliations as I do? Not everyone in this world is as close-minded as you, father. Understanding the realities of our society is not close-mindedness, daughter. Jock scowled. Public perception is everything to a business. They rise and fall by its hand, and those who are smart will do anything they can to avoid the latter. You of all people do not get to lecture me on the importance of public perception, Weiss countered. It is because of your behavior that the STC stocks are lower than they have been in years. It is because of your archaic practices that the reputation of the company is in shambles. And yet here you are, a contradiction to the very thing you say will ruin my future. Because the STC has enough power to fight those claims, you do not. Without the STC at your back, you have nothing. Nothing to offer, nothing to convince people to trust you. And so the business world will shun you. Then let them. I do not wish to do business with people who share your mindset. Then you will set yourself up for failure, the man said with a shake of his head. And for what? A relationship that is doomed to fail? What is it that you even see in her? What does she offer you but hardship? I wouldn't expect you to understand. Her voice was bitter. Just because the business is all you need to be happy, that does not mean I feel the same. Then why not choose both? He asked. Find a girl from a respectable family to fall in love with. I believe May Marigold is also of your inclination. Weiss was slightly taken aback by that suggestion. Though Yang had told her earlier that night that the man had known about her sexuality for a while, hearing him speak of it so casually still felt awkward. I didn't choose Yang. Given how he had only married her mother for the company, she didn't expect him to understand. And I want nothing to do with the Marigolds after what Henry did to Winter. She knew it wasn't fair to May, as the girl had just as many issues with her family as she did with hers due to her transitioning, but the idea of having any form of relation to Henry was something Weiss would never allow. However, much to her surprise, confusion appeared in her father's eyes, and his head tilted slightly to the side. What are you talking about? Oh, don't act like you don't know that Henry tried to force himself on her. Her father fell silent, and Weiss watched as his eyes gradually turned dark. He did what? His voice was quiet, and there was an edge to it that set a shiver down Weiss' back. Winter said she told you. It was probably the first thing she had said to her father in years that had not been undercut with hatred or anger. She did no such thing. The look in his eyes and the rising anger in his tone told Weiss that his words were true. She could have sworn that Winter had said she told him, or had she simply assumed that he wouldn't believe her? Weiss would hardly blame her sister for thinking so after everything the man had done. However, looking at the man in front of her, she saw the exact opposite was true. His previously calm eyes were alight with rage as he stood up, and Weiss knew that Henry's life was about to become much more difficult. I will see to the boy. What will you do? That is none of your concern, Jacques said, impatience entering his voice as he pulled out a file from his drawer. All you need to be concerned about is your future. And we are back to that, Weiss breathed internally. I've already told you that my foot a dash. That is enough. He tossed the file down onto the desk and opened it. Ilya's face greeted her, along with a complete workup of her history. While the file was small, it contained everything from her school records to her parents' names and a picture of the mine they worked in, the latter causing Weiss's blood to freeze over. "You think you are the only one who can figure out someone else's plan, daughter?" he snarled. "You thought I would not make this connection? I do not know Dash. Do not play the fool with me." He cut her off. "I know it was you, and you are lucky that I have protected you until now." Weiss looked the man in the eye and knew there was no point denying it any longer. So taking a step forward and putting her hand on the file, she sneered at him and stood up straight. "If you knew I did it, then why protect me?" "Because you are my daughter," he said impassively. "Everything I have done has been for your future, and I hoped you would have seen sense by now." Weiss couldn't help but scoff at that declaration. "But I am done protecting you, Weiss. I am done allowing this behavior to bring harm to our company. So if you choose this path, if you are not standing by my side tomorrow afternoon for the Hall of Yours launch, then my protection ends. I will give the board the information they have been seeking since you released this story, and you will be stripped of your title as heiress. And we both know how fast such a thing would spread, the questions it would raise about your motivations to do such a thing." Weiss stared at the man. For all his pretense of caring for her, all his talk of giving her everything she wanted, there he was threatening to take everything away from her. And Weiss knew that he was right about the fallout. Dating an ex-White Fang member was one thing, but if word were to spread that she had released documents that had unintentionally spurred the extremist branch to renew their attacks on Atlas, there was no doubt that plenty of people would try to link the two. If that happened, then even more doors would be closed to her. "You would ruin my future because I love someone you don't approve of?" She shook her head. "I have given you plenty of chances to understand the consequences of this decision," the man replied coldly. "But I cannot allow your affiliation with this girl to harm the STC any longer. If you are insistent on remaining with her, then the company will distance itself from you, and you will face the full consequences of your actions alone." Before she could even reply, he walked out from behind the desk and made his way towards the door. "It is time to make your choice, Weiss," he said as he pulled it open. "You have until tomorrow. I really do hope you make the right one." With that, he left the room and shut the door behind him, leaving nothing but silence. Collapsing against the desk, Weiss' mind began to race. She hadn't expected the ultimatum, and knew it should have been an easy answer, but it wasn't. She also loved business. It was her passion, and something she had always strived to excel at even without her father's pushing. But most companies had dark secrets, and as such never took lightly to people who leaked information, so the revelation to the public about what she'd done would absolutely destroy her career. Her business would be under before it even began. But there was no way she was leaving Yang. As much as she loved business, she loved Yang more. So, taking a deep breath, she pushed herself off the desk and quickly made her way towards the door with only one goal in mind. 24 hours, she thought to herself, and ripped the door open. I can think of a way to beat him. Chapter 86, A Decision Made, Part 1. I can't beat him. It was over. In less than 12 hours, Jacques would be going on stage for the Hall of Yours pre-launch event, and she would not be at his side. Despite everything, despite having spent the entire night searching every file that was still available to her, turning up nothing, despite knowing that the man would absolutely go through with his threat to out her, that fact had not changed. There was not a single chance in hell that she was leaving Yang. She was done living under her father's thumb. She'd done that for the last 18 years of her life, and she couldn't remember a single time where she had been truly satisfied. There had definitely been moments of happiness when a new opportunity had been presented to her, but those moments had always been short-lived. They were certainly not things she'd been excited to wake up for. Her relationship with Yang, however, that was more satisfying than she could have ever imagined. Every single morning she woke up eager to get out of bed, knowing that if she did then, there was a chance that she would get to see the woman she loved. It wasn't until she understood how that felt that she realized what she had been missing, and to go back to not having that was simply not an option. But in order to have that feeling, her future was going to be impacted. It wouldn't be destroyed, and she knew there were still some businesses out there that would admire her actions, but she would be lucky if that was 1 in 50 businesses. Nevertheless, she was continuing anyway. Doing the right thing, and the love of a good woman who would support her through everything was not exactly the worst reason to give up on a guaranteed prosperous future, especially when said future would mean obeying the man who had taken every good thing away from her. Still, that didn't exactly make what was about to happen easy to process, so it was with a sigh that she leaned her head against her desk and closed her eyes to rest for a few minutes. Unfortunately, the minutes turned out to only be seconds as a small knock came from her open door. Since she already figured that her father expected her to be trying to find a way to fight him, she hadn't bothered to shut it. "Wise," she heard her mother's voice say. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," she inhaled, opening an eye to look at her mother as she lifted her head. "Are you?" While the woman had definitely been a lot more attentive in the last week, even staying at the apartment overnight on the day Weiss had the nightmare, she was still quite unused to Willow coming to her room. "Yes," her mom said worriedly. "But you missed breakfast." "I did." Having been so busy, she had completely failed to keep track of the time, but a click of her scroll told her that it was almost 10 in the morning. There were only 6 hours left until the event started. "Oh," she ran a hand across her face. "I didn't realize it was that late." "I figured as much. That is why I brought you some." Pulling a plate of food from behind her back, her mother walked into the room and set it down against the edge of the desk. The type of food she'd been served definitely did not escape her notice, but muttering a quick thank you, she picked up a slice of dry toast and took a large bite. "Thank you," she said and took another bite. "MHM," the Willow hummed. "So I heard from Klein that you and your father spoke last night?" "That would depend on your definition," Weiss grumbled, taking another bite. "We certainly said words, though as usual, no conversation was had." "I take that to mean he is still insisting you leave Yang." "You expected him to stop?" "A small part of me still clings to the hope that his love for you will show him the errors of his ways." Despite her words, the woman let out a sad sigh. "But no, I didn't." Weiss was surprised that her mom was still capable of such thoughts. While she would never deny that a piece of her believed the man cared for her too, she was under no delusion that meant he would change. "So what did this non-conversation involve?" the woman asked curiously. "The usual, I assume?" "You assume correctly." Weiss shook her head and finished her slice of toast. "Instead of listening to what I had to say and what I wanted, he spent the entire conversation telling me that Yang wasn't right for me, that I could choose someone better. As if loving someone is just a choice you make." "I suppose it is to him," the eldest Shni said thoughtfully. "Though it should come as no surprise that I believe him to be wrong. Had he seen what that woman has done for you, he still would not care," Weiss concluded, picking up another slice of toast as she stood up and walked over to the balcony. "The only thing he cares about is that I have a future that he deems respectable, and he has made it very clear that future is to be at the SDC or nowhere. Yang plays no part in what he envisions for me." Another sad sigh left the matriarch as she, too, approached the balcony. "From your words, I take it he issued an ultimatum." "You mean one of his favorite pastimes?" Weiss scoffed and leaned against the railing. "Yes. Either I leave Yang and stand by his side for today's press release, or he reveals to the shareholders that it was I who leaked information to the press." Glancing to the side, Weiss wished she had seen surprise in her mother's eyes. It would have meant that the actions the man was taking were at the very least a new low, that even her mother was taken aback by such a desperate move. But no such thing was found in the blue orbs. Instead, they were very much the opposite. "I see," Willow mumbled, standing by her side. "And from your tone, I'm guessing you have already made up your mind?" Weiss gave the woman a nod. "He will stand alone." They were both silent. Only the rustling of the trees could be heard, and Weiss looked at her mother. There was no doubt that her mother knew what it would mean to have such information revealed, and since she had just said that she was willing to suffer those consequences for the woman she loved, she'd expected a bigger reaction. However, while the woman did appear to be deep in thought, she only reached out and gently took her hand, giving it a firm squeeze. "You're not going to try and talk me out of it?" "No," her mom replied with a shake of her head. "This is your decision to make. I will not try to decide your future for you. Besides," Willow paused and shook her head, "it would merely be me trying to argue for that which I do not believe." "So you think I am making the right choice?" Weiss heard the doubt in her own voice. "Yang is a remarkable woman, and I have never seen you happier than you are with her." Willow smiled at her. "I still remember the first time I listened to your music after meeting her. It was so full of life and hope and love. And then I heard you play together. Every day I watched you come home happier and more confident, And this week I saw just how much the girl is willing to stand by your side through. Choosing Yang will be hard on your future, but choosing the SDC would be hard on your heart. Letting out a sigh, Weiss gave her mother a nod. I know. Then why do you sound so doubtful? She shrugged. I feel guilty. The SDC was all I had left of grandfather. It was his gift to the world. He worked so hard to make something that could make a real change to people's lives, and here I am leaving it to a man who holds none of his values when I swore to fix it. Weiss. Willow's voice rang with fondness. If my father was alive, and you told him you wished to follow a different path, he would tell you to stop wasting time and do it. That is what he did for me when I told him that I wished to be a doctor. He loved the company, but he never wanted it to be a burden to someone else. So do not think for a second that he would be disappointed in your choice. Meeting her mother's eyes, she saw a sincerity inside them, and knew immediately that she was telling the truth. And while it didn't completely remove the guilt she felt for leaving behind the man's gift to the world, it at least helped her find a little peace with her decision. So giving her mom another nod, she placed a hand over the one holding hers, and leaned in to cuddle with her mother. It was nice, and made her feel like a child again. Thank you, Mom. You're welcome, dear. Unable to remember when the last time she'd been allowed such a moment with her mom, Weiss took the opportunity to enjoy it. The gentle wind blowing through her hair, the smell of the roses below her window rising to meet her nose. It was a moment of perfection that she wished she could hold forever. But she knew she couldn't. There was still work to be done. She still needed to make sure Auburn was informed of what was about to happen, and still needed to see Yang before the moment arrived. So, with a mournful sigh, she pulled away from her mother, and put the final slice of toast in her mouth. I suppose I should get ready, she breathed. Good luck, daughter. Her mother smiled, pressing a kiss against her forehead. Returning the smile, Weiss straightened her clothes and turned to leave her room. Oh, Weiss. She turned and saw Willow was still leaning over the balcony. Would you please tell Clyde I would like to speak with him? Of course, Mom. Thank you, dear, she replied in a tone that Weiss was unable to read. Weiss soaked in the sight of her mother framed against the blue sky, knowing that it would likely be the last time she would see it. With her choice, she doubted her father would ever let her back in the house. Eventually, though, the moment came to an end, and she pulled her door open, ready to face the consequences of a choice she had made. Feeling arms twine around her bare waist, Yang opened her eyes, and was immediately hit with a small amount of vertigo. Having spent the last 3 hours deep in thought with her eyes closed, she'd almost completely forgotten that she had dragged one of the tables from around the pool to the edge of the roof to meditate on. She knew it was a little irresponsible, but the light breeze helped to organize her thoughts, and there was enough distance between her and the edge that there was no real risk of her falling. What are you thinking about? She heard her girlfriend ask softly. Just how stupid I've been this month. She felt a kiss against her shoulder. That might take a while. Rude. Yang chuckled, feeling Weiss' lips pull into a smile against her skin. How'd it go with Fletch? It went well. Weiss nodded. It will be years before we even reach out for investors, so he isn't concerned. Good. Yang breathed a sigh of relief. And you're sure this is what you want? That I'm worth this? In truth, for everything Weiss had done to reassure her, she was still a little doubtful. When the woman had called the night before and told her what Jock had said, those feelings had once again come to the surface. However, Weiss had been quick to calm her, and though she still wasn't sure it was the right decision, she knew it had to be Weiss to make. MHM, Weiss replied after a second. I'm sure that we are worth it. All right, Yang hummed. If you're sure. I am. Feeling Weiss' arm slacken a little, Yang twisted her body around until she was facing her girlfriend. Looking down into her eyes, she saw no doubt in the woman's eyes, and felt her heart soar a little. The fact that Weiss cared so much about their relationship suddenly made her feel even more stupid than she had ever thought Weiss would leave her. Okay then. Yang smiled, leaning down to press a kiss against the snowy-haired woman's lips. So, are you gonna stay in and watch the launch? About 3 hours left, right? Actually, Weiss said, her hand slipping down to the table. I was thinking we could get something to eat instead. Really? MHM, Weiss said with a nod. The Hall of Yore was never of interest to me, and considering what that event will mean, I'd rather not just sit there and watch it. Makes sense, I guess. Yang smiled. Let me just take a shower then. I still got my workout stink on. I can tell. Weiss grinned. It's not that bad. You're nasty. Yang laughed and kissed her again, pushing the girl backwards and slipping off the table. So are you thinking high end or low end? MMM. I am thinking a nice Australian place. Low end. Got it. Yang replied with a smile, knowing that all the best Australian places were low end. I know just the place. Give me like 20 minutes to get ready. We both know it will be double. Weiss chuckled. You're one to talk. Yang countered and let go of her girlfriend. I'll be quick, promise. All right, just go. She knew the girl was merely trying to distract herself from a future that would be set in stone in little more than 2 hours, and she couldn't blame her. More than happy to oblique and make what was going to be a terrible day even a little better, Yang wrapped a hand back around her girlfriend and pulled her into a deep kiss. Love you, she said when they finally parted. I love you too. Weiss smiled. Now go and take a shower. I'm actually hungry today. All right. I'm going. Weiss' stomach grumbled as she walked through the streets of Vale's Australian quarter, the pungent smell of heavy spices and seared meats invading her nose and making her mouth water. The streets themselves were packed with people, all wearing traditional Australian garb, as they floated between heavily decorated stores holding all manner of items. Conversations followed freely, the atmosphere clearly jovial and celebratory, and more often than not she would pass groups of people dancing to music that drifted from any nearby store. Normally such a clustered environment and rampant celebration would not really be her scene, but given what would be happening in just under 2 hours, it was a rather welcome distraction. What is the event? She asked Yang, clinging tightly to her hand so that they didn't get separated. The Two Brothers Festival. Yang explained loudly over the noise, accepting some food from a passerby with a smile. The blonde passed the small piece of meat on a stick over to her. Knowing Yang would never hand her something she didn't completely trust herself, Weiss took a bite and felt her mouth fill with a delicious blend of spices. Is that the one with the dragons? She asked. Given how many beliefs and religions comprised Mistral's culture, it was hard to keep them straight. Yup, the blonde said with a nod. Today is dedicated to the Brother of Light. She pointed to a large, serpentine dragon balloon in the distance, its gold scales reflecting in the sun. Supposed to represent the beginning of new things. That is oddly fitting to our situation, Weiss remarked meekly, though she supposed that would be the case to at least somebody regardless of the day it was celebrated. Yang merely chuckled and led her down an alleyway that was just as packed as the main street. My grandpa would have said it's a sign. There was a fondness in Yang's tone. While Weiss didn't know much about Yang's grandparents, other than they had passed away some years ago, she knew the blonde had loved them a great deal. I wish I'd met him. Me too. Yang smiled. He'd love you. Every morning without fail he'd sit at the table and read through the business section while eating breakfast. He had good taste. Weiss grinned up at her girlfriend. You never told me how he, Heartbreak, Yang said effortlessly. After my grandma passed, his body just sort of gave up. They were together since middle school, so it was pretty devastating for him. He must have really loved her. That Xiao Long's in a nutshell. Yang chuckled and began to steer them towards a narrow doorway. We love deeply, and with everything we have. That definitely made sense. Not only had Weiss witnessed firsthand just how much Yang loved everyone in her life, but she had also seen the very same traits in Tai. That newest revelation only served to cement in her mind that she was making the correct decision. Well, lucky me. She grinned sincerely up at the woman. Pressing a kiss against Yang's hand and letting the woman pull her through the doorway and up a set of stairs, Weiss was met with one of the most mouth-watering smells she had ever encountered. The room was tiny, and most of its space was taken up by tables that were all pressed together in a square. In the center of that square were two older men in aprons preparing food on open grills that made the already warm room even hotter. You think my food's great? Wait till you try theirs, Yang said happily over the sounds of talking and scraping. Well, if it is as good as it smells, I can't wait. Trust me, it's better. Yang smiled, pulling a pair of chairs out from one of the tables. Then we better hurry up and order. Receiving a nod from her girlfriend, they both sat down and set about ordering. As the man prepared the food, causing her to flinch as the chef began to perform a trick with the knife. Weiss pulled her scroll free from her pocket and placed it on the table, checking the time to see that there was only an hour and a half left until the event went live. No doubt her father was in last-minute meetings and preparations. "We could have stayed home, you know," she heard Yang say, turning around to see the blonde looking over her shoulder at the device. Weiss shook her head. "You know how I hate sitting around and waiting for things to happen," she said. "Besides, the whole point of this is that I'm not letting him rule my life anymore. What is the point if I am merely waiting at home to see if he does what he threatened to do?" "I suppose that's true," Yang agreed and poured them both some water. "Any idea what you're gonna do when he does, you know?" "Damage control, maybe." Weiss shook her head to show her uncertainty. "A lot of doors are going to close regardless, but there are still a few of my grandfather's friends out there who would be unlikely to hold it against me." "Enough for your project?" "Doubtful." Weiss took a sip of her drink. "But enough to get it moving. When we start to show results, there will be a lot more interest. That's just how business works." "And you're sure it'll show results?" Yang asked, though quickly backpedaled. "Not that I'm knocking your new project or anything." "It's fine." She smiled at her girlfriend. "I'm confident it will work. It already began to show progress when he first attempted it, hence why the patent is so sought after, but by then he'd already damaged the company beyond repair. Which, with me at the helm, will not happen this time." "Good, good." Weiss sensed a little relief in the blonde's tone as Yang turned to watch the man prepare the food in the most audacious manner she had ever seen. Reaching out, she took the woman's hand and gave her a confident smile. She knew the brawler was just as concerned about what their future held as she was herself. Thankfully, she received one back. However, it was at that moment that her scroll began to ring on her desk, the alert sound and vibrations breaking through the babble. At the same time, Yang's went off in her pocket. As the blonde reached to her, Weiss unlocked her own and was surprised to find a message from Blake. "Stop whatever you are doing and watch this." Below it was a link to a website that Weiss recognized as one of the few news stations in Vale. Curious what Blake could believe to be so important, she clicked it, the website opening and beginning to buffer a live stream. Unfortunately, with all of the ads, it took a while, so long that it was Yang's reaction that she heard first. "Weiss!" she gasped. Yang needed to say no more. The live stream had already loaded, and Weiss found herself looking upon her mother's face. In her eyes was a mix of emotions. Fear, anxiety, doubt, but also resolve. As the camera zoomed out, she saw that the woman sat in a chair opposite Lisa Lavender, a reporter for the same news source she'd sent the incriminating documents that her father was now using against her, too. With the sound muted, she had no idea what they were talking about, but she didn't have to wait long as a news crawler appeared on the bottom of the screen. "House of Horrors. Willow, she reveals what really goes on behind closed doors." "What is she doing?" Weiss whispered and quickly hit the unmute button as concern pulsed through her. "Told us a lot about your past with your husband, but what about your current relationship? Given that you organized this interview, would I be safe in assuming that the abuse has not stopped?" "You would," Willow said with a nod, wringing her hands nervously in her lap. "Our relationship is as it has always been. We tiptoe around the house. We remain quiet during dinner. The replies and actions of our family are carefully considered so as to not cause him to fly into a rage. Fear." "You didn't know about this?" Yang asked, closing her own scroll and leaning over instead. "Of course not. Imagine how difficult that must have been for you all. How difficult it must still be. So what encouraged you to reach out now?" "I couldn't sit by and drink myself into a stupor any longer. I love my children, and my fear of the man led me to being absent where I should not have been, but my husband's anger at my daughter's choice of partner and her decision to leave the company has only made the situation worse. I tried to come out before, tried to find a way to make us safe, but I'm ashamed to say I let my fear take hold of me." "You are referring to the bribery scandal?" "I'd hoped that it would free us from his grasp, but when the time came, I was worried that the proof would not hold up, and he would take it out on my children." "So you mailed them instead?" "What?" Weiss' shout rang out through the restaurant as the woman gave the reporter a cautious nod. She didn't care, though, as she was already too busy throwing on her jacket. What on remnant was the woman thinking? "We have dash." "Go! I'm right behind you," Yang urged her. Barely giving her girlfriend a nod, Weiss closed off the interview and rushed towards the stairs with a sick feeling settling in her stomach. She knew exactly what the fallout from the interview would be, and she needed to get back to the manor before it happened. With any luck, she would get there before her father.
And that's all for today. Thanks for coming by and hanging out. I hope to see you next time.